Today I'm making a short demonstration video of an interesting flute by H.F. Meyer, the famous maker from Hanover. Meyer was active as a maker from 1845 to 1896. His son maybe took over the company after that. At any rate, the company did continue into the 20th century. Meyer's flutes were very highly respected during his lifetime, and they were copied incessantly in what we now know as the nach Meyer flutes. This particular flute, when I first saw a photo of it, my thought was that it was a nach Meyer flute. It was very, very dirty and grungy. It was hard to see the details, and it had this metal head joint on it, and I thought, well, it couldn't be a real Meyer and have this metal head joint on it. But when I received the flute and looked at it carefully, I realized that the body of the flute is a real H.F. Meyer with a fair amount of wear on the finger holes. That is indicative of a flute that somebody loved to play, and I can see why, as it is a very nice flute. The basic layout of the instrument is quite typical for his flutes. So we have the basic 8 keys. Then in addition to that, we have the high E to D trill. And we have the right hand to B flat, wherever it is here. We also have the low B key, which in this case sort of works. It's a little hesitant at the moment, but what's really interesting about the flute is thinking about this head joint. I'll just say right off the bat that I don't believe that Meyer supplied the flute with this head joint, although who knows, it could have been an option. The classic problem with Meyer flutes is that most of them had an ivory head joint, and the head joint invariably would crack. My H.F. Meyer that has an ivory head has a crack, and luckily it's on the back side of the head, whereas many of them go through the embouchure hole, which makes repair more difficult. But I was very curious about these metal heads. I have several other flutes that have this kind of head, and I always notice that they actually work pretty well. And I think the reason that they work well is that they don't have any leaks in them. And the cheap wooden head joints that we find on nach Meyer flutes, I think often just have little bitty leaks in them that just make them not play so well. So on my demo, I, of course, am playing the flute with this head that was supplied with it. And it works very well. I think it's really nice sounding. It's quite a large embouchure hole by my perspective. But I thought it would be interesting to look at some of the other embouchure holes on H.F. Meyer flutes and on nach Meyer flutes of various types. So in this photo, you see on the top a flute by the Boston maker Kuhlau, which has a fairly large embouchure hole. It's a beautifully made flute, way above what you normally would think of as a nach Meyer flute. It's really a beautifully made flute. The second one down is a nach Meyer that someone gave me a number of years ago that plays pretty well. It has the same sort of basic head. And then there's my H.F. Meyer with the ivory head, and then this flute, the newly acquired Meyer with the metal head. And one thing to notice right off is the size and the shape of the different embouchure holes. So the classic shape is the one that we see for instance, on the ivory head joint. That's a super, super nice embouchure hole. The other ones tend to get a little bit too large, and if there's anything that makes this current H.F. Meyer a little hard for me to play, it's that the embouchure hole is on the big side. The construction of these heads is interesting because it's a sandwich. There's metal on the outside and there's wood on the inside. In the case of this head, it's boxwood, and then metal again on the inside. So it acts pretty similar acoustically to a regular wooden head joint, I think, because the wooden head joints are already metal lined. There are other little differences that you can see in the flutes, and I think this is sort of telling of the sort of price and quality of the instrument. On this H.F. Meyer and on my other H.F. Meyer, there is a cork position indicator, and it's a real cork indication gizmo here, whereas on a lot of the nach Meyers, they just have a little bump in the top of the cap that looks kind of like it has a cork indicator, but it doesn't. It's just a visual thing. And you'll notice that on the other nach Meyer in the photo, that one does not have this kind of cap, and that one, it's just visually a bump there. I thought it might be interesting to hear a little bit on the metal head joint and then the same flute played with the ivory head joint. Because of the standardized size of the metal tubing, it's easy to swap out the head joints. One thing that surprised me is how different the pitch is between the two of them. But I'll just play a little bit on each. So this is the metal head joint with the recently acquired. And now with the actual Meyer head joint, you'll notice that of the different size of embouchure, this is the smallest of them. And I've always had the feeling that the cheaper a flute got, the more likely it was to have a big embouchure hole. It made it easier for people who didn't have a well-developed embouchure. So this, I think, is sweeter and just overall works incredibly well. One thing that I found interesting is that this ivory head with the smaller hole is louder than the metal head with the bigger hole. Especially in the lower register, it's really very strong. The pieces that I'm playing, that example that I just gave, is from a set of variations. That's just the introduction. Air d'Amide by Cottignies. Another variation by Cottignies. This one is from the opera Gustave. And an Andantino by Gariboldi from his opus 88. And finally, a Cantabile by Kuhlau. This is from a big collection called Der Dilettante. I hope you enjoy these pieces.